the 3 biggest ways millionaires lose their wealth.
It's Brian Preston, the money guy.
Yeah, Brian, I'm super excited about this show because this is going to be one of those ones that for all of our financial mutants out there, for all of our folks that are aspiring to financial independence and wealth building, we're going to give you some tips and tricks and things to be aware of to make sure that the wealth that you are working so hard to build can last for a lifetime and maybe for generational lifetimes.
Yeah, I want to, because it is a different mindset, a different skill set, and I want to give a little time to the difference between preserving wealth versus building wealth, because we spend a lot of time on the building wealth, but there is a skill set that we need to make sure we're exercising and preparing for as well. And I love, you guys know, I talk all the time about how I'll be doing life and then things will happen that fit perfectly into the context of what the content is for the show.
Yep.
I look at it as a blessing that this was just supposed to be presented to me at the right time. Well, right now I'm listening to Dave Grohl's book, The Storyteller. Y'all know,
Huge Dave Grohl fan.
You know, another coincidence, you know, the Foo was not, that's, I think one of you guys, we named it Financial Order of Operations, and then you guys were like, that's perfect for you being a huge fan of Dave Grohl.
Yep, it worked out well.
I mean, it worked out nicely, but here's the thing, in the part I'm about halfway through the book, Dave Grohl shares the best piece of money advice he ever received.
Okay.
And it was actually from his father. Now, you know, and if you listen to the book, you'll see him and his father have kind of a bumpy relationship, because the day that Dave let him know that he was going to drop out of high school and go join a band,
didn't go well.
You know, I think it sounds like his dad's more traditional, and I can understand how a father would be like, ooh,
you sure you want to do that?
Meanwhile, his mom goes, you just better be good. But fast forward, Dave starts having some success with Nirvana, and his dad was like, look, this likely won't last. So my advice to you is treat every check like it's the last one you'll ever make.
I love that.
And here's what Dave, from hearing that, it helped him on his wealth building journey, because it scared him straight, because he was so just petrified that at any point he was going to have a fear of bankruptcy because this was going to go away. And this is where it triggered another moment in me. It's because he said, and I wrote it down, the quote, it encouraged him to keep his frugal lifestyle.
Love it.
So when I hear frugal lifestyle, it then made me think about when I read Morgan Housel's book, The Psychology of Money, and he has a chapter in there called Getting Wealthy versus Staying Wealthy. And he starts the chapter before he goes into some of his storytelling himself. And he says, look, there's a million ways to create wealth. There's a lot of books that will tell you to do that, but there's really only one way to keep your wealth, and it's a combination of frugality and being completely paranoid. And I was
which sounds like a negative thing, right?
Yeah,
being paranoid sounds like a negative.
It does tie into what Dave shared on why he said the best piece of advice he ever got is because before he started making big money, or right as he was starting to make big money, that he immediately was paranoid that it was going to go away tomorrow, and that he was going to embrace, to ensure it didn't happen to him, that he lost it all, he was going to continue to embrace his frugal lifestyle. So that's the word that Morgan Housel uses, as survival. And he actually gives 2 stats that I think are worth repeating. Is 40% of companies that are successful enough to be publicly traded have lost their value over time, meaning they went away.
Like they've actually, so 40% of publicly traded businesses, those traded on a major exchange, have gone out of business.
And then this ties even more into today's show on the 3 biggest ways millionaires lose their wealth. Is the Forbes 400 list of the richest Americans has a 20% turnover rate every decade for causes that have nothing to do with death or transferring money to loved ones or relatives or family members.
That one I find especially saddening, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you make it to the Forbes 400 list, that's like a very elite company, right?
Yeah.
There are just not a lot of folks that do that. And yet, even the folks that make it there don't manage to stay there for decades on end. 20% of those turn over each decade. And you wouldn't think that would be the case.
Well, you would think that it's the death. You know, it's somebody passing away and you pay estate taxes, or you think it's going to be they gave a lot of money to their family members or something like that. No, it just shows you how volatile wealth preservation is. And then that led to, and this is kind of the closeout of the intro with the Morgan Housel reference and the Dave Grohl, is that Morgan shares there's a difference between getting money and keeping money. It's different skill sets. Getting money requires taking risk, being optimistic, and then putting yourself out there. We cover all that in all of our aspirational content. The skill set required to keep money is you've got to have humility. You've got to also fear that what you've made can be taken away just as fast. And that's exactly what Dave Grohl was talking about. And I talk about on the show all the time. A healthy entrepreneurial fear. I think anybody who owns a small business, you constantly have this fear that it could go away at any point in time. Sounds like Dave Grohl has a healthy dose of that too. And then the third thing is frugality. And then the last thing is acceptance that what you have or what you've created may not be repeatable, because that is the part that I think a lot of us there's a false confidence. That's where humility comes in, is that if you are at the point of success, is understand you might not be able to get back to this exact point just because there is this moment in time. When I go and I talk to anybody about what we do for a living, I'm like, I'm just so blessed that we're born at this point in time, because I was like, look, I have horrible eyesight. My hair gets so greasy. If I don't shampoo it every day, you guys would be like, what's up with his hair? And then I can't grow facial hair. So if I was born like in the 16 or 1700s,
you were born at the right time.
I don't think I have the right skill set to be successful in life. But yet somehow in this century, in this point in time, my nerdiness and the ability to have running water in the house and have the ability to get, contacts and other things, I look like a normal, functional, successful person. So there is something about understanding you might not be able to repeat this process, but this sets up perfectly all the different ways that you can lose money. So we want to kind of coach you on that skill set of preserving your wealth building as well as building it.
And look, we have a unique perspective, right? Because we work with wealthy individuals, wealthy families all over the country, and we've seen the pros of how wealth can be handled well, and we've seen some of the cons of how wealth is not handled or not passed on and handled well. So we're going to walk through sort of three areas where we see wealth most often get decimated. In this first one, when we first say it, you're going to think we're being funny, but it's true because there are some statistics behind it. And the first place where we see wealth get absolutely decimated for wealthy individuals is through kids.
Well, and I think you guys count on us to be your tour guides of somebody, not only in our journey of building our own wealth, but we do work on our day job as fee-only financial advisors for successful families and companies. So we have had, through decades of experience, we see this firsthand.
Yep.
And I will tell you, this is a big one. We put this as number one is because, unfortunately, the kids that we love with all of our heart, and there is some type of just amazing thing that happens when you have your first child or you adopt your child, is this unconditional love is a tremendous thing that takes over. And I always tell people that you never know who your friends are going to be the crazy parents are until they have their first kid, because there is something that just happens when you have children that you don't know. Are you going to be a normal good parent? Or are you going to be the crazy, hover parent? But that is, it all goes into this unconditional love. But there can be too much of a good thing that we always try to give some guidance to make sure your kids aren't, pulling you underwater if they start getting in trouble themselves.
And so naturally, when we say kids, all of our minds immediately jump to like young children, right? They are thinking about babies and toddlers and kids in the house. But when we talk about wealth being lost, we're actually talking about three different stages of children, three different times when we see the wealth transfer or the wealth accumulation really struggle. The first are the early years. We do talk about that, when you do have children in the house. The second is the adult years. Once your kids should be out of the house, they're no longer living with you. They should be out, flown the nest on their own. And then the third is when you age and it's time for you to start having conversations with your kids about finances and about what's going to happen after you are no longer here. The first one is pretty easy. Stage one, it's the natural parental, it's hardwired in us that we want to take care of these little ones, right? Like they come out and we think we would do anything in the world for them, to protect them, to provide for them, to create opportunity for them. But what often happens is parents get their order of operations all out of whack. And when it comes to their financial foundation, they start thinking, oh man, this kid is here. I got to make sure that they have this, or they can do this, or they experience this, or the college account has this much in it, or I'm doing these things, not recognizing that one of the best gifts we can often give our children is the ability of us not moving into their basement at some point in the future.
Yeah, we give the analogy, and you guys, you've heard us say it a bunch, but it is the flight attendant analogy. When you get on an airplane, they always start off every flight with, hey, make sure if for some reason the oxygen mask drops down, secure yours first before you help out the children next to you. Your finances are very similar, is that you need to make sure you're in a healthy place, because your kids are going to be able to get student loans. They're going to be able to hopefully get scholarships or grants or other things. But you're kind of on your own financially, and that might be a big uh-oh, because I've done the New York Times articles and other things. We've done the screen shares where there is a growing trend of parents having to move into the basement of their adult children, not because it's a thing that we've all chosen because we all want to have this, family lifestyle where we can, live together, raise the children and grandkids together. No, it's because mom and dad are broke. So we're telling you, take care of your retirement savings before you start loading it up for the kids.
Yeah, oftentimes we'll see prospects or new clients come in, and they'll be so excited showing us what they've accumulated in their 529 accounts or in the UTMA accounts for the kids. And we'll have a pretty uncomfortable conversation reminding them that, unfortunately, when it comes to financial decision making, you have to be the top priority. Your financial circumstance has to be above the kids. That's why if you go follow our financial order of operations, or if you go to moneyguide.com/resources and download our free deliverable, saving for college and funding future expenses that you may incur on behalf of your kids comes way late in the financial order of operations after you have your financial footing in place. So that's kind of the first stage, right? We have young kids in the house getting our foundation in place. Well, the second stage where our kids can really impact our wealth actually happens once they get out of the house, once they have flown the nest. Most of us get our kids for 17, 18, 19 years while they're in the house, and they go off, and they're supposed to get out of the nest. But we have entered into sort of this new era where it's becoming very, very difficult for kids to actually get out of the nest, for kids to actually be gone, actually be out on their own, and that can be devastating to your long-term financial well-being.
So we talked about this in show prep, and I'm actually going to do an audible, and you're going to be like, oh my gosh, why didn't he do this in the show?
No, I love it when we do this. Love it when we do these.
We're about to cover the 7 factors of wealth before you pull them up from the Millionaire Next Door. And guys, I want to tell you, here's how you know this is a big deal, is that 2 of these 7 have to do with adult children and wealth creation. So, but I want to give you 2 stats to give you context on this. The first one is, and listen to this, 47% of parents with adult children gave them $1,000 or more in 2020 to help with bills, debts, and other expenses. That's like half.
So I'm thinking, I'm like, all right, 2020, it was COVID. It was unique time. It was downturn. Okay, maybe this was isolated. 1 in 2, 47%, about 1 in 2 parents with adult children had to help them out because of COVID. Unique time, unique circumstance, unique economy. Maybe that was a fluke. Maybe we'll give a pass on that.
So then we'll go deeper. 56% of parents that make more than $80,000 helped out their adult children financially and gave an average of $8,530. Let me break this down. I don't like to do public math, but I'm even without doing public math, I can tell $8,530 a year out of somebody who makes just over $80,000. That's over 10% is going to the adult children. And it gets worse because they go a little deeper in the fact that money that goes to the adult children, if you ask the parents, was that kind of earmarked? Was that set aside for the adult children? A lot of times it was not. This is, once again, that unconditional love where you see your children struggling, your adult children, and you kind of just go, wow, I got to make sure, I can't stand to see them hurt. I can't stand to see them in pain, so I help them out. The money, they actually asked these parents, what was that money actually allocated for? And listen to this. Of the parents that gave money to their adult children, 33% said they were planning to use it to pay down their own debt.
So I want to rewind that. So instead of firming up their financial footing, instead of getting their debt load down as they age and as they approach retirement, they opted, instead of doing that, to support their adult children who should have been on their own otherwise, okay?
27% were planning to use it for daily living expenses. That means that
Oh, wow.
they had to cut back their
Yeah,
lifestyle to
yep.
make sure they're helping out the adult children. 27% also said they were going to use some of it to build an emergency fund.
Oh, so even that, right? Again, if you're following the financial order of operations, you know that a fully funded emergency fund is step 4 in the financial order of operations. Here are parents who haven't even got step 4 figured out, and now they are trying to help out their adult out of the house children.
And then 16% said they were going to use it to save for retirement. So by the way, every one of those goals was pretty healthy and pretty noble for their own financial life, but it shows through that unconditional love they were willing to sacrifice. So now I think it's the right time to kind of show you, because this is worth repeating. Out of the 7 factors that create wealth, according to the Millionaire Next Door, 2 of them fall right into this understanding of how adult children impact wealth building. So let's kind of go through those 7 factors, Bo.
Yeah, so if you look at them, and again, this is from Dr. Stanley's book, here they are. Number 1, they live well below their means. Number 2, they allocate their time, energy, and money efficiently. Number 3, financial independence is more important than displaying high social status. Number 4, their parents, meaning the parents of millionaires, did not provide economic outpatient care, meaning they did not subsidize their lifestyle. Number 5, the millionaires' adult children are economically self-sufficient. So they are not required to provide economic outpatient care to their children. Number 6, they are proficient in targeting market opportunities. And number 7, they chose the right occupation.
So let's look at 4 and 5 really quick. Their parents did not provide economic outpatient care. So let's think about this. The factors that have created wealth for a lot of first-generation millionaires, because that's the majority of millionaires are first generation.
Yep.
They didn't get any help. You know, and I look at this as, if you're going to get strong and exercise and create a strong heart, whatever, whether it's muscles or just creating and you're exercising a strong heart, you got to do the work at some point. You got to put the reps in. You got to do the practice. I think this is the problem, and this is why in Dr. Danko and Dr. Stanley's book, they specifically talk about economic outpatient care can actually weaken instead of encourage wealth building for those adult children. And you see that directly with the successful children turn into successful adults who are successful at wealth building. Meanwhile, the ones that are getting all this stimulus from the parents, it doesn't necessarily create strength.
And I think we all have case studies. At least I know, because I grew up from very, very humble beginnings, but I did have friends whose parents had done very, very well. And it was very interesting watching our 2 upbringings and seeing some of the things that their parents did for them, some of the clothes that they bought them, some of the automobiles that they purchased when they got out of college, when they got to college, out of high school, the places that they rented, the things that they did, the trips that they were able to go on. It was a very different story, but then I'll look at how much emphasis those kids put on building wealth and frugality and making wise financial decisions, and it wasn't the same. They just had a different outlook on that. And so I do think this can be something that if you don't, at some point, you have to, if you've done it well, you have to be able to get the kids off the payroll.
Yeah.
You have to be able to get them out of the house, off the payroll, so that they will be able to self-sustain when you are no longer here to be able to watch after them.
Number 5 was their adult children are economically self-sufficient. We already covered, because like I said, I made the audible where we covered what the parents actually wanted to use that money. But I think, just grouping 4 and 5 together, here's the advice on what I want the financial mutants to do out there is, guys, be very thoughtful on how you're raising your children into adults. Because we talked about first stage was you got to make sure you take care of yourself and your financial stability before you start worrying about the kids' college and so forth. But you will get to that point where you are saving for them, and then they're going to transition from kids to teenagers to young adults. And I would encourage everybody, and we've done content on this, go ahead and start priming the pump of good financial management decisions by your young teenage children by doing matching funds on if they're earning money. Try to encourage them to start the Roth IRAs. Try to encourage them to start funding money into investments so they can see the power of your army of dollar bills. And then I think it's also important when we get to those key life decisions. You know, a lot of kids, they daydream about the 16 or 17-year-old moment when that first car. I've always thought it's good to let them have some skin in the game on that first car purchase. That's what I did with my own daughter. Was I paid for half the car that I matched whatever she had saved up, and that's how we bought her first used car. And it's hard, I got to tell you, because we live in an affluent community.
Yep.
A lot of my neighbors are buying their kids brand new cars, and I get it. As a parent, you're thinking safety first. There's all kind of new features and other things that it's just priceless not to do that. And that's true. I can understand that, but you have to also think about the fact of what is the car that's going to get my child to understand the value of a dollar and not get sidetracked. I mean, this all goes into building that self-sufficient and that economically stable adult child that doesn't need your help.
And here's the truth of the matter. All of us are going to develop some thoughts around money. Every one of us has to develop that at some point. And you've talked about this all the time, Brian. When you first got to college back in the 90s, if somebody just offered you a T-shirt or a bag of chips, you could sign up for a credit card, right? If you don't equip your kids to get into the real world understanding how, this is old school nomenclature, but how to balance a checkbook, how to operate a budget, how to spend less than you make, how to save for the future, how to have an emergency fund. If you don't teach them those tools, then the first things they learn about money may be how to borrow money, how to swipe a credit card, how to take on student loan debt. It's up to us as parents to make sure that our children are prepared for when we're not there looking over their shoulder and they start making those decisions.
Yeah, you don't want them faking it until they make it, because I think that's so much society tells people, hey, go use that bridge of debt and other things. You want to equip your children that turn into adult children of yours, that they know, hey, no, I don't want to fake it until I make it. I want to enjoy each phase and have the success that should come and have right expectations of when things should happen, and you can help them on that journey by instilling those skill sets at an earlier age.
So we've talked about stage one is when the kids are young and in the house, and then stage two are when the kids are a little bit older and they're out of the house. Well, stage three happens many years later, and it's not having crucial conversations with your adult children as you age. And we see this all the time with clients and prospects where the communication never happens, then it is not set up for a smooth transition of wealth through the generations.
This can play out several different ways. I know people who had great childhoods, but then they find out later, not because of good communication, but because some bad event happens or something, that the parents are broke.
Yep.
And then there's other situations where we'll be talking to the adult children who are clients or something, and they'll talk about their parents, and they'll be like, I don't know what they have going on. And that is a very dangerous thing, because it puts, if you're not having those healthy conversations, it puts a big question mark. And we all know, unfortunately, as we get older, we don't always keep all of our faculties about ourselves to where we can manage money well and other things. I just think the transition can be much healthier if you open up communication. What's the first thing they tell you at therapy is make sure you have good communication. And I feel like that is not happening necessarily with intergenerational kind of transitions and discussions on money.
Yeah, and why does this even matter? Why is this important? Well, we do an annual wealth study where we interview a lot of our Money Guy listeners, Money Guy clients, and Ramsey Solutions did a large study asking, do millionaires inherit their wealth? So folks who've been able to build some level of financial success, where did it come from? How did they get there? Well, what's really interesting, 74% of millennials believe that most millionaires inherited their wealth. 52% of baby boomers believe that exact same thing, that most millionaires inherited their wealth. Well, what's the reality? And you look at the population that we interact with on a daily basis, we found that only about 11% of our population who were millionaires inherited over $100,000. About 12% inherited something, but not what they would call material. It was less than $100,000. But a whopping 77% of the millionaires that we interact with and that we talk to are first generation. They did not inherit anything. They built it on their own. And so you might be thinking, oh, that sounds amazing. That's wonderful. That's really positive. Well, there's a downside. There's a negative side to this.
Well, it's one of those things. By the way, this is not just our data. We came in at 77%, but there's multiple sources. It's 80% in one, 85% in another. But there is a disconnect from what the public perceives about wealth creation and what actually happens. But I have covered this, and Bo just alluded to it, is that if you're going to have 80% of the wealth created first generation, that means the churn cycle on wealth must be pretty severe and extreme, and it's true. And we've covered this before, but guys, look at this. 70% of wealthy families lose their fortune by the second generation.
And that's so sad, right? It was almost 80% take a generation to build it, and then 70% of those lose it by the second generation. I'm just thinking about like my kids that I'm like, man, all this hard work that I'm doing, I don't know. It's sort of saddening, especially for first generation builders.
It gets worse because if you thought 70% was bad, think about the fact that by the time you get to the third generation or the grandchildren, 90% lose their fortune. And once again, the cycle's repeated itself. So that's why this is very much a churn cycle, and it's on you to make sure you're instilling these right decisions and these right skill sets into your children so they don't require the economic outpatient care. But let's kind of talk about also, what does this mean from a communication standpoint of making sure that you're having good open conversations with your parents as you're an adult?
Yeah, because one of the things that is just a sort of a fact of life in terms of the way that our bodies and our brains are built is that an unfortunate truth is that many of us are going to suffer from some form of cognitive decline as we age. We won't be able to make decisions in the same way or quite with the same ability that we once were. And now that life expectancies are expanding, I think we are seeing this more and more, and I think we will continue to see this more and more.
Well, and I want to give a word of caution because this is the thing. If you just say, hey, I'm just not going to get involved in mom and dad's finances. If they wanted me to know, they would tell me about it. Realize there are, and I hate to sound cynical, but there are industries where there are people that take advantage of older individuals. And I hate that. I mean, because it bothers me. And I'm just going to give you a few experience shares that I've personally helped unwind some of these things and kind of come in at the last minute and hopefully, and I have saved the day on a few of these. But like one, we had somebody who had inherited a bunch of IRA money.
Okay.
Spouse passed away, and IRA money rolled over to the widow, and then they met at a local fast food restaurant. I kid you not making this up. At a local fast food restaurant, somebody who convinced them to buy some equity indexed annuities with an IRA.
Inside of an IRA.
With inside of an IRA that already had a lot of those protections. We fortunately got a hold of this decision before the period that you can look back and unwind it with the insurance company. And they most state laws allow that. But that's a common occurrence. This person that sold this product to this hangs out at this restaurant looking and trolling for these type of situations. And realize the product that was sold had a huge commission. I think it was like 8.5 to 10% commission rate on it. It was not a good deal. I had another client. There's only 3 of these. I'll go through them pretty quick. But I had another client that they had found somebody who saw all the equity they had in their house and had tried to convince them, hey, go refinance. Even though you're older, you're retired, go refinance your house so you can take the proceeds from that home equity.
Were they debt-free when they did?
Yes, they were debt-free.
No mortgage at all.
No mortgage at all, so we can go invest this in the financial markets and take advantage. Now, look, financially, maybe that makes money because there is an arbitrage situation to where historically financial markets do great compared to the low interest rates. But is that something you do on somebody who's in retirement?
And do you ratchet up the risk as you get into retirement? Absolutely not.
There's a disconnect there on the why and where that falls into the wealth building and life cycle of the individual. So pay attention to that. And then the third thing, this is why the communication is so important. We actually had somebody come to us that found out, and I kid you not, their parents had over $200,000 squirreled away in cash in the house, in the curtain rods, in the pockets of their clothes. It was hidden throughout the house. That is a horrible nightmare.
It's scary is what it is.
I asked Daniel, I don't know if this stat exists. I would love to know how much a Salvation Army takes in or Goodwill takes in annually from finding things, jewelry, cash, and other things in coat pockets that are donated after somebody passes away. This is a legit issue that everybody needs to be aware of. And like I said, be very proactive on understanding and having these conversations with your parents as you're an adult, so that hopefully there's some good communication and you can transition into how to handle money as we age in a noble and good way.
Now, look, this is very Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People-esque. You want to be sensitive in how you have this conversation. You don't want to say, hey, mom, dad, let me see your balance sheet, and let me start talking about how you want to transition your money to me. That's not the conversation you want to have. But if you want to make sure that they are protected and they are taken care of, as they age, it makes sense to ask them, hey, mom, dad, have you guys done estate documents? Do you know what's going to happen if something were to happen to you guys? Have you talked about where you want your things to go? Have you talked about how you want that to happen? Have you let the people who will be involved in that know that they will be involved in it? Those are all very mature conversations that we should be having with our parents so that we can all be on the same page. Because one of the worst things that we see is when a child, a parent passes on, and the child comes to us and they're like, hey, look, mom, dad, they had it. They were astute. They had it all figured out. But I've got no idea what they have going on because their system was obviously working for them, but I am clueless. And we have to kind of turn into detectives forensically to help them put the pieces together. And that takes a lot of time and a lot of cost, and you lose a lot of efficiency. If you can have those conversations on the front end, you set yourself up so much better long term.
No doubt. I want to move away from the children and talk about step 2 or number 2 of things that, and this is very timely currently, to ways wealth is lost. And number 2 is inflation.
I feel like if we could do like post edit on this, we should have like the sound effects, like the dun dun dun.
Yeah, I mean it's definitely a theme.
I feel like this is something that everyone's talking about right now. If you turn on any sort of like financial commentary, you read any sort of blog, article, whatever, inflation seems to be a hot button, hot topic item right now. So a lot of folks are probably trying to figure out, okay, what does that mean? Is inflation something I should be worried about? How should I think about it? Is this horrible? Do I need to run for the exits? What's going on? Why is it going on? And how's that affecting my personal situation?
Well, I want to kind of, and I like giving you guys experience shares because I think it helps you kind of reflect on this when you look at your world and how you have the loved ones in your life and your friends, how you can help pay it forward to them. And I think about the fact of like, we know wealth is created in retirement plans. And it's one of those things where if you look at the Ramsey Solutions research, typical millionaire reaches 7-figure status in their employer provided retirement plan. You also see it's around age 49. But I know when I was on a local school board, back when we were in Georgia, I was on the Board of Education. And I remember when I started questioning about the 403B plan that they had in the school system. And I think you could probably look at all school systems at the time. Now, look, this has gotten better through legislation. But they shared with me that most people were just choosing the stable value funds in their retirement accounts. And so I had this visual.
For those who don't know, a stable value fund is like a sort of a cash, fixed income, very low risk, low return type investment holding.
And that bothered me because it meant that when they came in to do the education meetings and they were encouraging these people, I felt like it was very self-serving to the person that was pitching these things because in their words, I'm trying to remember who told me this, if it was somebody from the administration side or from the annuity company, but they said, look, when they're in the stable value funds, when the market's volatile, they don't call you. Nobody's ever scared during market downturns. They actually feel very excited. Well, we know that's less than a quarter of the time the market gets beat up. But what I worry about, and it's exactly what we want to cover in this section, they get eaten alive when you hit inflationary periods. Because anybody whose idea, and I also resemble this in the household I grew up in, my parents didn't buy stocks. They didn't buy real estate. They bought CDs. I mean, I really did. That was my parents, when they saved money, they were great savers. They lived on less than they made. But their idea of investing was to go to the local bank and buy CDs. And unfortunately, that type of saving and investing for the future is highly susceptible to having its purchase power just completely diminished by inflation.
And why, like right now, is this so pertinent? Why is this so applicable to today? Well, Daniel did a great job. He went and pulled this for us. This is a chart showing the annual change in inflation since 2010. And you can see, if you were to draw sort of a best fit line, there's sort of an average in there you could figure out over the last decade. But if you look at what's happened recently, coming out of the COVID downturn and into 2021, inflation has popped. It has been big relative to where it's been over the last decade.
If the Federal Reserve is telling us we have 5.5% inflation, you know that number is substantially higher than that. This is just what they're willing. It's kind of like when you see a quarterback in college that says they're 6'2". They're probably
they're about 5'11".
You know,
That's exactly right.
So pay attention. If this is what the government's showing, and you know it by when you go look at gas pump prices, cost of food, cost of supplies, it's substantially higher than 5.5%. So it's definitely on the rise, and it's something to be very mindful of.
Now, so the immediate question that you might ask is, oh man, inflation. Is inflation always bad? Is it something I should always be nervous about? Is it something I should be concerned about? And that's not necessarily always a bad thing. You know, oftentimes inflation can mean that there's really strong consumer demand, but supply is struggling to keep up. And a lot of talking heads right now are suggesting that that's the type of inflation that we're seeing because we had these supply chain issues that happened through COVID. There was a lot of pent-up demand, and now that demand is surfacing, supply is having a hard time keeping up, and it's what's causing prices to rise, what's causing inflation to ramp up. That may not necessarily, in and of itself, be completely a bad thing.
Somebody had posted a comment, this is probably a week or so ago, saying, Brian, what you described was transitional inflation. And I'm like, no, because here, let me explain. When you hear the government say this is going to transition through the economy, in my mind, when I hear transition through, that means, okay, prices are going to go up 5 to 7% temporarily because this is transitional, but they'll come back down. That's not what happens. What I see and what I worry about is that you see inflation come on the scene, prices go up 7, 10%. Yes, maybe it moderates to where next year they only go up 3 or 4%, but the prices don't come back down typically. I mean, and once again, experience share. My grandmother bought a car in the mid-'70s. It was an Oldsmobile for like $2,600.
Like probably like a new car, like a nice
brand
car.
new Oldsmobile. It was like, just a few $1,000s. Fast forward when my parents bought a car in the early 80s, and it was like $12,000. I mean, this stuff happens. And by the way, y'all now hear $12,000. You're like, that's a cheap car.
I'll buy it tomorrow.
So, I mean, that's the thing. It doesn't go back. And that's the thing that we all need to be mindful of when we talk about inflation. Bo puts a nice optimistic, and I love it because that's glass half full. I get nervous about what this inflation means for everyone. Bo knows where I'm going, so I won't take us aside on a sidebar.
No, we can go there. So let's talk about that a little bit, right? So inflation, I am going to stand on the side of the equation that inflation is not always bad and always negative. However, it can be bad and it can be negative. So if the premise that I'm putting out is true, then it stands to reason that during an inflationary time, there are people who would benefit or it would help or would be protected against inflation. And there are folks on the other side of the equation that would be harmed, that would not receive benefit, that would not be helped. So we thought it might be valuable to kind of walk through those two types of people. So who are the folks that inflation helps, or who are the folks that can, dare I say, benefit from inflation, or at least keep up with inflation so that they're not harmed by inflation?
Keep up with
inflation.
Keep
All right,
going.
I'll switch my vocabulary. Number one are asset owners. Folks who own assets in an inflationary time tend to be protected against inflationary pressures. And this makes sense, right? I'm going to use a very easy asset that most of us are familiar with, a stock. If you go buy a stock in a company, let's say Coca-Cola, that makes you an owner of Coca-Cola. Well, if because of inflationary pressures, Coca-Cola has to increase the price that they charge for their Coca-Cola, the benefactor of that increase in price is the owner of the company, which you as a stockholder are. So if you own a bucket of diversified companies, a basket of diversified goods, or hard assets, it's likely that you'll be able to mitigate some of the negative impacts that inflation come with.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to save my soapbox moment, but I do think that this is the problem for aspirational people. And we both have come from that background where we want that American dream where you come from not much, but you work hard, you get education, and you can get a leg up by investing in yourself and then investing in the marketplace. And it is true. Stocks are a great thing. When we get to who it hurts, I want to reserve the right to give a comment.
Okay, so I'm gonna. So if asset owners are benefactors, or if it helps, maybe not benefactors, but if it helps, might there be a time in history we can go look? Okay, well, how did stocks do? How did they perform in an inflationary environment? And so we just went and pulled the late 70s, early 80s. If you look in the year 1979, inflation was measured at about 11.35%. The S&P 500 largest companies in the United States, made about 19%, a little over 18.5%. 1980, inflation rose. It was up 13.5%. Market made about 33%. 1981, inflation stayed high at about 10.3%. Market did lose a little. It lost about 5% that year. But then 1982, inflation subsided some. It was only, air quotes, 6%, but the S&P 500 made 21%. So even if the cost of goods is rising at 11%, 13%, 10%, 6%, if your assets, your army dollar bills, is growing at 19, 32, 21, you are offsetting the increase in the cost of goods, and you're offsetting the loss in purchasing power risk that inflation creates.
Yeah, this is something that's lost. A lot of people, when they think of inflation hedges, they always jump to real estate, they jump to gold, they jump to things with limited supply, even Bitcoin recently.
Sure.
But I still say don't overlook what the stocks can do, because yes, there might be short-term volatility as they work on pricing and as well as recessions or anything that might be coming through short-term. But long-term, companies do have the ability to raise prices and adjust to inflationary concerns.
So asset owners are one group of folks who can mitigate the risks of inflation. Another group of folks, interesting word that we came up with to help offset, are debt folks. Generally speaking, folks who have debt do well in an inflationary time because as inflation happens, paying off a debt from the past becomes easier and easier to do. And we don't just see this with like individuals. This also happens often with like sovereigns, with government entities, those that house a lot of debt. When we enter into an inflationary time, it's easier to pay back that debt when inflation is taking place.
When I graduated college, my portion of the rent in our 3-bedroom apartment in Atlanta with my roommates was $430 a month. I never forget that my parents' mortgage payment on their entire house was, because they were still having a mortgage payment, was $300 or $400,
which was less than your portion of rent.
It's because they bought the house in 1978 for $60,000. The mortgage on that's pretty cheap.
Yep.
It's not like
exactly
they
right.
refinanced. It's just that that's what inflation does. It essentially makes your debt seem much more reasonable, and that's a great segue into sovereigns. That's why does Washington not freak out about inflation? Is they're looking at our deficit, they're looking at all the debt our country has, and they're like, hey, how you make $30 trillion seem affordable? You make it feel like 15. I mean, by raising what everything costs, and that is unhealthy. And that's a great segue into who does inflation hurt. And I probably will give a few quick comments because I do want to speed this along.
Sure.
But go ahead and fire that up, Bo.
Yeah, so the one that it hurts probably the most are savers. And when we say savers, we're not talking about those who live on lots of money. We're talking about cash holders, those like your parents who are just putting money in cash, putting money in CDs, because those type of instruments have a very difficult time keeping up with the change in the cost of goods, keeping up with inflation.
And this is why I think I am so passionate. Growing up in a household where my parents were doing everything absolutely right. I mean, lived a very modest lifestyle, didn't waste it. Anything. We're doing all the things except for making the money work for them because they fell into what's easy, what's understandable, and that's your typical savers who are cash holders or CDs. I don't like that. And that also leads to renters. It doesn't make the list because we talked about that in content. But I do worry about anybody who's trying to transition from renter to owner of your first house. of your, cars, automobiles, everything seems to get more expensive. It moves the goals. They're running away from you. That's not healthy in the long term.
Yep. So savers, I'm going to throw renters in there as well. Also, those that are on a fixed income. If you are someone who is retired and maybe you have an annuity payout or a pension payout, and there are not cost of living adjustments, or maybe the cost of living adjustments don't actually keep up with the rate of inflation, it can hurt you. What used to be able to pay for your living expenses now has a more difficult time paying for the living expenses. So those strictly on a fixed income are harmed during an inflationary time. And also those that are risk averse, because what most often happens is when you are risk averse, you come much lower on the risk spectrum when it comes to how you invest your assets. Well, if you're much lower on the risk spectrum, we know that a higher risk generally leads to a higher reward. Lower risk generally leads to lower reward or lower rate of return. If you are achieving lower rates of return, it's hard to keep up with higher inflation risk.
Somebody can probably post, if you've seen the screenshot that I've seen on social media, of what it takes from an asset allocation mix to create 6 to 7% annual returns by decades. And guys, it's scary. I mean, because in the past, it wasn't too long ago, you could have almost 90% bond portfolio and generate that 6 to 7% conservative portfolio. Now it's flipped. I think you have to have pretty much 90% equities to get yourself to the rate of return of that 6 to 7%. That's scary. We're pushing people further and further out on the risk spectrum to cover for their retirement and their cash flow needs. That's not a good thing.
And here's the last one that we kind of put on here. And this one is those who are prepaying low interest debt. And again, this is kind of tied into the risk averse piece. If you're satisfying low interest debt and retiring debt that's at 2, 2.5, 3, instead of having those dollars go out there and create a meaningful rate of return that can keep up with the rate of inflation, you could potentially be harming your future self's purchasing power. That's why we have the financial order of operations. That's why we created the FOO, so that you can make sure you're taking the right steps at the right time in the right order so that you don't run into these types of problems.
Yeah, the big thing, we break it into two camps. Are you under 45? Are you over 45? And the reason is compounding growth. Under 45, do not prepay the low interest debt. I mean, we already have shown you on these slides that inflation causes your debt to get smaller just by the sheer fact that inflation is occurring in the background. If you're in that under 45, you need the compounding growth to get you through a successful retirement. Post 45, assuming you've done all the right things, it's okay to prepay the debt because now you're thinking about the wealth preservation more than the aspirational building wealth in the background. So pay attention to that difference.
All right, so we've talked a little bit about how, kids can be something that devastates wealth. Inflation or the rising costs of goods can be something that devastates devastates wealth. Here's the third one that we've actually seen, and unfortunately we've seen this one over and over and over in real life case studies with people in the community, with friends, family, is that folks don't account for how risk can impact your financial situation and circumstance over the long term.
Yeah, it's, this is one experience share is that I have only once in my career recommended that a prospect reach out to an attorney because I felt like the way their money was previously managed was so egregious,
negligent,
that they should go seek counsel to see if they should get something back. Because it was horrible to see somebody. I can't remember if she was late 70s or early 80s.
She was late 70s when we first talked to her.
Who had a portfolio that looked like the latest and greatest of the dot-com bubble. I mean, it was anything and everything that had technology in its title, and this was for somebody who was quickly approaching the 80-year-old threshold. It was horrible. I mean,
they had a year of market performance where it was down like 60%.
Yeah, think about this. So you think about the Great Recession, losing 50, 60, 70% of your assets in a year when you're approaching 80. That's not good management. So it is one of those things where you need to understand there is a dance, a balance, an art to the fact that as you get older, your risk profile is moderating, even if you have to leave some on the table because you want to make sure there is some on the table.
That's right.
when you need it in retirement because you're actually spending or using those resources. I had a story. It was once again, kind of inspired by the Dave Grohl book that then kind of triggered a memory that I had of reading the Morgan Housel book. Is that he shares in one of the books on chapter 5, I believe, on keeping wealth versus making wealth, that Berkshire Hathaway, we all know Warren Buffett, we all know there's Charlie Munger hanging out in the background, but did y'all know there's a Rick?
I never at the shareholders meeting, I never hear about Warren, Charlie, and Rick.
There were 3 people at Berkshire Hathaway. It was Warren, Charlie, and Rick. But you don't hear anything about Rick anymore. It was Rick Guerin. And Rick, Warren Buffett was asked about this at one point, and here's what Warren Buffett shared on it. He said, Charlie and I knew we'd become wealthy, but we were not in a hurry to get wealthy. And I think that's very Warren Buffett, is that he's sharing these kind of, folksy type stories, but there's a lot going on under the surface with that. He said Rick was in a hurry to get wealthy. Super smart, but just in a hurry. And the way he was cutting a corner, listen up, because I see this going on everywhere on social media right now. Everybody is looking to cut a corner on their wealth creation. And Rick got caught because he was in such a hurry to create wealth. Remember, average age for millionaire status is age 49. Pay attention. Keep that stat in the back of your mind as you're looking at Instagram and everything else. But this is what Warren shared. In 1973, 1974, there was a big downturn. Rick was leveraged, meaning used debt, with margin loans. The stock market was down approximately 70% in those 2 years.
So, I didn't go with this, but imagine this is what Rick is thinking, right? Oh, man, returns are so good right now, and I can go borrow money so cheap. I can go take out a loan. I can refinance my house. I can do a cash out. I can go borrow at super low rates. Sound familiar? And I'm going to take the proceeds of that and go dump it into something that's going to have a much better rate of return, a much higher rate of return. We are hearing this over and over and over right now, present day. Keep going.
Yeah, so it's that whole thing. Warren Buffett once again said, you can tell he didn't use skinny dipping, but you can definitely tell who's naked out in the ocean when the tide rolls back out. And that's what debt is it's essentially allowing you to have something, but you might be naked. So margin calls were what got Rick. He had ended up, because of those margin calls where he had to cover the debt and obviously the value got crushed, he sold his Berkshire Hathaway stock to Warren for under $40 a share. Now here's the cool thing about Berkshire Hathaway. We all know it's legendary in the fact that Warren and Charlie do not do stock splits. They don't do anything to change the valuation of the price of the stock. So you can actually compare what he paid to what it's actually trading at right now. So every one of those shares that he traded at under $40 a share is now worth at least, because I haven't looked at in the last few days, $432,000 a share.
That is painful. And you have to know that Rick is just sitting there thinking, man, was the risk I took on worth it? Did I really need to be in the position I put myself in? And holy cow, what did that cost me over the long term? Now, maybe you're not partnered with a Warren Buffett or a Charlie Munger, but all of us are faced with this exact same situation today in the decisions that we make. How much debt do we take on? What is our actual savings rate? Do we have an emergency fund? Are we making sure that as we build our wealth, we're not only focusing on the building part, we're focusing on how much of it do we get to keep over the long term? Because frankly, we are all, every one of us, emotional creatures.
Well, we're also running. I see so many people on social media that are saying, look, I'm going to keep my equity exposure at 100% until 3 years before retirement. I see that everywhere. And I wonder how many people are running up also the scoreboard when they have enough in the account. And that led to, I told Daniel, I was like, put in the cycle of market emotions.
Sure.
Because we put this slide up all the time, and you guys can see, because you could easily say we're somewhere between optimism and euphoria right now in the cycle of market emotions where everybody feels like they're a genius. And you see this concept. I see so many people that have turned from investing to becoming speculators where they're piling in because something's a great investment, but because the momentum says, hey, these people are making money. The greed of and the jealousy of wanting to also make money has you jump into it. That is the perfect setup for the next downturn where you'll see people go through all those negative emotions, the anxiety, fear, desperation, panic, and then they reach the depression point of just selling, giving up. They just think this is horrible, and then we go through the whole cycle again. But Daniel has blessed us that he actually put numbers on what a market cycle feels like, and then what it feels like to actually do it right through diversification, because so many people are skipping that step right now because we are in the upside or the optimistic side of investing.
Yeah, and we all know that one of the things that people get so nervous about is when we talk about diversification, when we talk about spreading out risk and coming further down on the risk spectrum, we have to sacrifice some rate of return is the common thought process. Well, Louis thought this was sort of interesting, and Daniel put this together. From August of 2000 until September of 2002, the S&P 500 lost about 46%. Now, if you were in a diversified portfolio, and we just did a 60-40 standard portfolio, 60% S&P, 40% 10-year Treasury, you would have only been down about 23%. So you'd be thinking at that point in time, oh, I lost money. I was diversified. I guess I didn't lose as much, but I'm still negative. Well, then from October 2002 until October 2007, S&P 500 made 90% over that time period. The 60-40 portfolio would have made about 62.9%.
Now hit pause, because a lot of you guys, you're going to hear that and be like, I'm kind of jealous of the people who were just 100% equity and right into the index. I only made 60%. They made 90%. This diversification thing's disappointing.
It's not worth it.
That's what. Why am I doing this? Even if you lost money, because I've had clients. I had clients that I picked up during this period. I started my first company in 2002, and I still remember this family that still, I work with the widow, where they came in scared to death because we had just made it through the dot-com bubble. And then I did the risk profile on the husband and the wife, and they came back as very scared. So we came up with a very good diversified portfolio. And then 2003 happened. Market made a lot of money. They made good money, but he goes, hey, maybe I can kick up that risk profile a little bit because I can handle it.
Of course he said that.
Because everybody through greed, because remember there's two there's emotions. There's the fear when you're going down, and then there's the greed when it's going up. And people will see the 90%, man, 60 seems like it's kind of weak sauce.
Yeah,
so
why are we doing
more. We're going to show you why this is important.
Okay, so now fast forward. From November of 2007 until February of 2009, S&P 500 lost 52.6%. The diversified 60-40 only lost about 29.6%. But you're still thinking at that point in time, oh man, I lost money. Right?
Still lost money.
I didn't get that big run up that the S&P had, and now I've lost money again. Well, then we look from March of 2009 all the way through December of 2019. And over that 10-year period, over that decade, the S&P 500 would have made 339%. The 60-40 portfolio would have, again, not made that top upside. It would have made about 214.5%. So you're thinking, man, every downturn I lose money, then every upswing I make money, but man, not as much as the market until you stretch out and look at the total picture. Over that total return period, from August of 2000 until December of 2019, the S&P 500 would have gone up about 113%. The 60-40 portfolio went up 176.6%. If you look at $100,000 investing, the $100,000 that was just in the S&P 500 would have done great. It'd be worth $200,000 and almost $13,000. But the diversified portfolio that wasn't on the wild roller coaster is worth almost $277,000. This is why we diversify over the long term.
What sits in the background is not how much you make, it's how much you keep.
That's
at
right.
the end of a long, because realize you're on a marathon of building wealth, and it's so easy to get distracted. And that's why, I mean, all the skill sets I think that create wealth is just understanding this is a long journey, that if you just get some basic fundamentals and good management styles set up, you'll be successful. Just don't basically destruct yourself, self-destruct in a way that you getting your own way of this simple process of creating wealth in the long term.
Building wealth is surprisingly simple, but it's not easy, right? The steps are pretty well known. That's what our entire show is about, is how do you build wealth? How do you accumulate? It becomes a little more difficult to make sure that you maintain your wealth and that you preserve your wealth. And so what we hope is that as we kind of walk through these 3 areas where we see wealth get taken out, where we see wealth get devastated, you'll be aware of that. And you can start making decisions as you approach your financial lifestyle and circumstance so that your wealth will actually stand and withstand the test of time.
So I want to challenge you. Harness your inner Dave Grohl and ask yourself, are you paranoid? Are you living the frugal lifestyle that lets you live on less than you make? That's not the traditional American way right now, because we're very much pushed by consumer purchases and other things. You can tell it by our savings rates. How paranoid, how frugal, use that skill set to protect your wealth as you're on this journey. I'm your host, Brian Preston, Mr. Bo Hansen. Money Guy team, out.